My name is Isabel Tran, and I was 29 when I learned the bitter taste of betrayal, not from a stranger, but from someone who once braided my hair in high school and stood beside me through midnight ramen and shared dreams. Her name was Lila Reyes, and once she was my best friend. We were the kind of girls people underestimated. Brown-skinned daughters of immigrants, fluent in both our native tongues and the unspoken rules of survival. We sat in the back of our computer science lecture halls, whispering about AI trends and ethics while the boys in front debated GPUs. Lila was brilliant in a way that glowed, magnetic, quick-witted, and always armed with a story to charm the hardest hearts. I, on the other hand, had the quiet kind of fire. Methodical. Relentless. The kind that kept burning long after the spotlight faded. It started with a late-night walk on Mission Street. We were fresh out of grad school, exhilarated and exhausted, talking about how digital therapy apps were failing marginalized communities. I'd been working on a prototype for a multilingual, culturally adaptive mental health platform for 2 years, something that could listen, learn, and respond not just with logic, but with grace. I poured out the core idea to Lila that night, a natural language interface trained not just on datasets, but on lived experiences, starting with stories from our own neighborhoods. She nodded, wide-eyed. "Issy, that's brilliant. We should totally build this together." I should have noticed the we, how it wrapped itself around my idea like ivy, coiling tighter with each brainstorm session. I brought the architecture, the datasets, the early-stage model I'd trained using interviews from local shelters and immigrant support groups. Lila brought her charisma. Within months, she was pitching it at networking events as our startup, though I often noticed her voice smoothing out the R to my when she thought I wasn't listening. The shift was subtle at first. She began scheduling meetings without me. Investors asked why the technical founder wasn't present. She told me they found her more relatable. "You're the brains, Issy," she said one night over tea. "Let me be the face." I told myself I didn't mind. I'd never wanted the spotlight. But one morning, I opened my email to find a newsletter, TechWave Weekly, with Lila on the cover, hailed as the creator of the most promising AI startup of the year. Not a mention of me. Not one. I didn't yell. I didn't post rage threads on Twitter. Instead, I filed a provisional patent for the system's most valuable refinement, a dynamic bias reduction layer that adapted language in real time. It wasn't just an upgrade. It was the heart of the platform's credibility. I remember sitting in the patent attorney's sterile office, surrounded by sterile certificates, and thinking, this is where I become invisible on purpose. While Lila courted VC firms with flashy decks and charm, I worked. Quietly. Precisely. The software was licensed under my name now. She didn't know it yet, but the very soul of her product was mine. She built her house on stolen ground. I just waited for the tide to rise. I wish I could say I felt triumphant the moment the patent was approved, like justice had finally wrapped itself around me, a warm armor against all the slights and stolen moments. But the truth is, I felt hollow. Lila didn't know yet. The news wouldn't hit her until her investors started asking questions about intellectual property. I knew how these things unfolded. Slowly at first. Then all at once. In the meantime, I vanished from the circles we once moved in. I deleted my Twitter account, turned down panel invitations, and quietly left the Slack channels we'd built together. My name disappeared, but my work didn't. In the silence, I built. I spent long nights refactoring code, optimizing the platform's linguistic tree so it could parse trauma-informed responses not just in English, but in Tagalog, Spanish, Vietnamese, Farsi. The emotional nuance that algorithms always seem to miss? I taught mine to listen. By day, I took contract gigs to keep the lights on. By night, I trained my model like it was a child I knew would one day change the world. Meanwhile, Lila was everywhere. I watched from the corners of LinkedIn as she gave TEDx talks about her innovation, smiling that glossy smile I once thought was beautiful. She announced funding rounds like wedding engagements, Seed, then Series A, all accompanied by pictures of cocktails and chrome co-working spaces. I don't know when she realized she'd built something she didn't truly own. Maybe it was when the lawyers started calling. Maybe it was when the enterprise clients pulled out, citing IP conflicts. Or maybe it was when the headlines stopped coming and the silence became deafening. What I do know is this: 3 months after my patent was granted, I received an email from one of her early backers. They wanted to license the technology. Not from her. From me. I remember staring at the email for 10 long minutes. There was no gloating. Just a deep, echoing quiet, the kind that comes after a long, bitter storm has passed. I didn't respond right away. I let the offer sit. Then, a week later, I got a message from Lila. The subject line was just one word: please. The body of the email was only a sentence: can we talk? I stared at that blinking cursor, the ghost of everything she took between the lines. I didn't reply. I didn't reply to Lila's email. Not that night. Not the next day. Not even when a second message arrived, titled simply, "I'm sorry." She had typed more this time. A full paragraph. Apologies wrapped in justifications. I didn't mean to shut you out. It all happened so fast. The investors wanted a single voice. Her words tried to curl around me like old vines, familiar, worn, and thorned. I closed the laptop and let the guilt wrestle with my anger. She'd once been the first person I called when I got sick, when my grandmother passed, when my first crush turned cruel. She knew my favorite ramen spot, the song that could break me, the childhood wound I never quite healed. But she also knew where my idea came from, how deeply it was rooted in my identity, in our shared communities, in the silences I'd translated into code. She stole it anyway. The venture capital world doesn't care about emotional theft. It deals in paperwork and patents. And the truth is, I'd done everything right. She may have had the charm, but I had the core, and now legally, I had the exclusive license. Word spread. Quietly at first, like whispers carried by wind. The startup Lila had so proudly built began bleeding money. Her burn rate soared while users dropped. The advisory board splintered. A well-timed tech exposé revealed inconsistencies in the IP claims. She tried to pivot, slapped together a new name, new branding, new buzzwords. But it was too late. Investors began pulling out. First the angel ones. Then the institutional backers. I knew how it would end. I'd read enough case studies, seen enough rise and fall headlines to know the trajectory by heart. And then came the call. It was from Maya Chen, a senior partner at one of the firms that had once backed Lila's vision. Maya didn't mince words. "We know who really owns this tech," she said, her tone sharp as glass. "And we want to work with the rightful architect." I paused. "On what terms?" "You keep the IP. We build a new brand, properly credited this time. We provide funding and infrastructure. You lead." I leaned back in my chair, fingers tracing the wood grain on my desk. This was everything I had once hoped would come: recognition, support, control. But now that it was here, I felt only a quiet kind of resolve. No euphoria. No glee. Just peace. "All right," I said. "Let's talk." Starting again was a strange kind of blessing. There were no welcome parties, no glossy features or early fanfare this time. Just silent rooms, clean slates, and the whisper of possibility. I called it Kintsugi AI, after the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold, embracing flaws as part of an object's history. It felt right. My startup had been shattered once, splintered by betrayal. Now I would rebuild it, not by hiding the cracks, but by filling them with purpose. Maya's firm moved fast. Within 3 weeks, I had a small team of engineers and a modest budget. But more importantly, I had autonomy. The platform began to evolve in ways it never could when Lila was at the helm. We stripped away the performative branding she'd favored, the tokenized images, the vague promises. In their place, We built partnerships with real community leaders, mental health experts, and linguists. We didn't just translate, we understood. I hired interns from neighborhoods like the one I grew up in. Kids who had never seen themselves reflected in tech before. They came into my office wide-eyed, unsure, but full of fire. I saw echoes of myself in them, the yearning, the sharp minds dulled by decades of underestimation. I sharpened them. Meanwhile, Lila's silence grew louder. Occasionally, someone would forward me a link, a quiet article buried beneath other headlines. Former startup Darling faces lawsuit over IP misuse. Promising mental health app shuts down amid investor exodus. The comments were brutal. The internet has little mercy for failed icons. I didn't delight in her downfall, but I also didn't stop it. What she built wasn't real. It was scaffolding on someone else's foundation. When it fell, it did so by the rules of gravity and of truth. Then, one afternoon, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject: a favor to ask. From lilareyes.old@gmail.com. I almost deleted it, but curiosity won. Inside, she wrote, I know I don't deserve a response, but if you're willing, I'd like to meet. Not to ask for anything. Just to explain. There are things I never told you. Please. 1 coffee. 1 hour. Lila. I stared at the screen for a long time. My new team was buzzing in the next room, celebrating our first major partnership. The future I had once only dreamed of was beginning to take shape, not in her shadow, but in my own light. Did I owe her an hour? Maybe not. But the part of me that still remembered our late-night ramen talks, the girl who once believed in friendship unbreakable, whispered, you should hear her out. We met at a little cafe tucked behind the Mission District, the kind of place that served chai in ceramic mugs and didn't mind if you lingered. I arrived early, unsure if she would come. Part of me even hoped she wouldn't. But just as the minute hand ticked past the hour, she walked in. Lila looked smaller somehow, not in stature, but in presence. Her usual glow was dimmed, her eyes ringed with fatigue. She scanned the room until our eyes met, and then offered a smile. Not the radiant, performative kind she once wore like armor. This one was hesitant. Human. Hi, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Hey, I replied, gesturing to the seat across from me. We sat in silence for a few moments, the hum of the espresso machine filling the space between us. She didn't launch into apologies or excuses right away. Instead, she stared at her hands, then finally spoke. I was scared, she said. That's what I never told you. I was scared you'd leave me behind. I blinked. What? You were always so sure. So good. You had the brains, the vision, the discipline. I knew if people really saw that, I'd become background noise. I didn't mean to steal it. Not at first. But the more attention I got, the harder it was to step back. I let her words hang in the air, watching them settle like dust. I always wanted to build something together, I said quietly. But not like that. Not at the cost of my voice. I know, she whispered. And I lost everything anyway. We sat there, the ruins of what we were spread out between us, invisible and undeniable. I'm not asking for anything, she added quickly. Not money. Not a job. I wanted you to know I regret it. All of it. She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn notebook, the one we used to sketch ideas in, late into the night. Pages filled with scribbles, diagrams, half-thoughts, and sparks of brilliance born from ramen and Red Bull. I kept this, she said, sliding it across the table. I thought maybe you should have it. I touched the cover, fingers tracing the worn edges. A part of me ached. For what we'd had. For what we lost. I'm not angry anymore, I said, surprised to hear the words spoken aloud. She looked up, eyes wet. Really? I nodded. But I'm not the same person you knew, Lila. I've grown roots in different soil. She nodded too. I can see that. You're not in my shadow anymore. You never were. We didn't hug. We didn't make promises to stay in touch. But as she walked away, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but release. Back at the office, I placed the notebook on my shelf. A reminder, not of betrayal, but of resilience. Of how even the deepest wounds can become gold if you're willing to rebuild with care. After our meeting, I expected to feel something triumphant, like I'd won some invisible war. But closure doesn't arrive with fanfare. It settles slowly, like dust after an earthquake. Lila's apology didn't erase the betrayal, but it softened the edge. I could breathe more freely now, unburdened by the need to prove myself right. I already had. Kintsugi AI was gaining traction. Not in the viral, overnight sensation way that garners magazine covers and venture capital blitzes, but in the quiet, sustained way that lasts. Our platform was being used in shelters, schools, clinics. Places that needed empathy more than efficiency. It worked. People felt heard. And that mattered more than any spotlight. Then came the invitation. A national tech conference in Seattle, asking me to speak on a panel about ethical AI. I almost declined. I'd spent so long building in the shadows, part of me feared the light. But Maya convinced me. You don't have to go for them, she said. Go for the girls in the audience who need to see you up there. So I went. I stood backstage, nerves fluttering in my chest like caged birds. I looked down at my hands, the same ones that once trembled typing code at midnight, sketching out neural trees in the margins of textbooks. The same hands that had held back, given, created, let go. And when they handed me the mic, I stepped into the light. I told them the truth, not the tabloid version of stolen IP and business revenge. But the deeper truth, how innovation is born in bedrooms and late-night conversations. How trust is a currency more valuable than capital. How systems can't heal people until they learn to listen first. When I finished, the applause was loud, but it was the stillness that meant more, the eyes wide with recognition, the quiet nods, the tears someone tried to hide behind a sleeve. Afterward, a young woman approached me. She looked barely 20, hair tied back in a practical knot, eyes full of fire. Thank you, she said. I'm building something too. I didn't think people like us could be this. I smiled. You can. And you will. She nodded, but didn't walk away. How do you get over the fear, she asked softly. Of people stealing it. Of being used. I took a breath. You don't, I said. You just build it anyway. And then you build it better. Stronger. Yours. The conference marked a turning point, though not in the dramatic way stories like to pretend. There was no thunderclap or viral post that changed everything overnight. Instead, it was subtler, a shift in how people spoke my name, how partners introduced me in meetings, how my inbox quietly filled with invitations that once bypassed me entirely. Still, I kept my pace steady. I had learned too well what happened when the climb outpaces the grounding. We expanded slowly, team by team. Kintsugi AI moved into a shared space near the waterfront, not some tech palace, but a loft with good light, exposed beams, and a view of ships coming and going. I liked the symbolism. Constant motion, steady direction. That spring, I started something new, a mentorship circle for women of color in AI. I called it The Thread. We met monthly in the back of the office, a pot of jasmine tea always steeping on the table. We weren't building companies in those sessions. We were building each other. And still, in the quiet, Lila lingered. Not physically. She'd moved to New York, from what I'd heard. Teaching workshops, freelance consulting. Her name had faded from the circuits we once shared, but once in a while I'd spot a comment on LinkedIn from her account, usually supporting someone else, quieter now, more grounded. One day, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. I recognized her slanted handwriting instantly. Issy. I watched your panel. I cried. Not because I wasn't up there, but because you were. That girl with the notebook full of dreams, you honored her. I didn't. But I'm trying to become someone who might someday. I hope you keep building. L. I folded the letter and slid it into the back of the notebook she'd returned to me. Some things don't need a reply. Some things are better left as echoes, soft, sincere, unfinished. That evening, I walked along the pier, the air briny and electric with the promise of a storm. I thought about how far I'd come. How many names I'd been given: the quiet one, the coder, the fool, the ghost, the survivor. But I'd finally chosen my own. Builder. Not of apps. Of truth. Of trust. Of futures. And, from where I stood, I could see every fractured piece shining in the gold that held me together. Owning something, truly owning it, is a feeling they don't teach in business school. Not the kind that comes with contracts and cap tables, but the kind you carry in your spine. A quiet knowledge that no one can take what you've built, because it came from you, from places too sacred for theft. That's what Kintsugi had become, not just a company, but a reclamation. Of my voice. Of my value. But even as we grew, I kept certain things close. I still coded in the early mornings before the world stirred. I still read user feedback with the care of someone reading a diary not meant for them. And I still signed off on every major feature change. Not because I didn't trust my team, they were brilliant, but because every line of code carried a promise. We see you. It was during one of these early mornings that I noticed something strange. A new organization had launched a nonprofit offering free mental health resources to immigrant families. Its interface was elegant, its language inclusive, and it looked eerily familiar. Too familiar. I dug deeper. The codebase had been open-sourced, a clever fork of our earliest public prototype. Legal? Barely. Ethical? Not at all. The nonprofit's founder? A name I hadn't heard in over a year. Nico Anders. One of Lila's early advisors. The same man who once told me to focus less on social impact and more on market fit. My chest tightened. He hadn't just taken inspiration. He'd lifted whole sections of our logic model, rebranded it as charity, and was now collecting accolades for being a champion of equity. It was a different kind of theft. Not for profit, for reputation. For image. I took a breath. Not panic. Not anger. Strategy. We reached out through our counsel, respectful, measured, clear. Cease and desist. A conversation, if he preferred. I braced for backlash. Instead, I received a call. From Lila. She didn't say hello. Just launched into it. I didn't know, she said. I swear. He asked for old notes. I thought it was just research. I didn't think he'd use it to build a shell of what we created. I finished. Yes. I was quiet. Then, why call me? Because I still owe you, she said. And I know what it's like to watch your work get repackaged by someone with better PR. I'll help fix this. If you let me. It was the strangest thing, an old wound offering me a bandage. I let her help. Not because I needed her to, but because maybe, just maybe, healing isn't always linear. Sometimes, even the ones who hurt us can help unhurt a little of the world they once broke. Nico Anders was the kind of man who never said your name until you had something he wanted. In our brief encounters years ago, he'd addressed me with vague nods and avoided eye contact, speaking instead to Lila, even when I answered the technical questions. And now here he was caught with code he didn't write, ideals he didn't carry, and a suddenly fraying halo. Our lawyer reached out first, presenting our claim clearly. Specific sections of back-end logic were lifted from our early architecture. It wasn't just a breach of trust, it was infringement. The cease and desist letter was polite but sharp. It gave him two options: attribution and compensation, or a court battle he'd almost certainly lose. Nico responded with a press release. It was filled with vague corporate platitudes, gratitude for inspired innovation, commitment to collaboration over conflict, and an insistence that their work was independently derived. A classic deflection. He hoped the public wouldn't look closely. But I had something he didn't. Proof. Documentation. Time-stamped designs. And people. One of our original interns, Sophia, bright-eyed and fiercely loyal, had helped draft the exact schema Nico now claimed was his. She offered to testify if it came to that. "Let them know," she said. "We built this from blood and caffeine, not PR magic." Lila, true to her word, did something I hadn't expected. She posted publicly a quiet, untagged tweet. Just a screenshot of our earliest mock-ups and a single line of text. Credit where it's due. I was there. This belongs to Isabel Tran and the Kintsugi team. It didn't go viral, but it was seen by the right people. The tide turned quickly. Nico's allies began pulling back. His nonprofit's board released a statement distancing themselves. Within a week, we had a settlement offer, licensing fees, full attribution on the platform, and a public apology. I read the draft of that apology 3 times. The man who once told me our work wasn't marketable now called it visionary. The same man who dismissed my concerns now called Kintsugi foundational. We accepted. Not because I needed his validation, but because it wasn't about him anymore. It was about the interns watching. The founders coming up behind us. The girl sitting in her bedroom coding empathy into a machine because the world wouldn't listen. They needed to see that quiet work still holds power. And so we moved forward. Gold in our cracks. Wind at our back. After the dust settled, we didn't celebrate. Not with champagne or speeches. Just a quiet Friday morning meeting in the conference room, muffins from the cafe downstairs, and a simple note I scribbled on the whiteboard. We protect what we build. No one said much, but I saw it in their faces. A deep breath held too long now finally exhaled. We had defended our work not with rage, but with precision. We hadn't raised our voices. We had raised the truth. And it held. I spent that weekend alone. Not because I was sad, but because solitude had become my ritual after victories. When you've had to carry your own worth for so long, you learn how to savor your strength in silence. I wandered through Golden Gate Park, sketchbook in hand. I hadn't drawn in months, but the trees invited it. Their broken branches still stretched skyward. Nature was never perfect, but it was whole and honest. That night, I opened the notebook Lila had returned. Inside were our old doodles, our naive wireframes, sticky notes of dreams written in ink too hopeful to fade. On one page, a half-formed phrase we used to toss around, never fully shaped. Compassion at scale. That was the dream. Not code, not funding, not headlines. Just the idea that empathy could be engineered, not manufactured, but translated, expanded. That someone in a crowded ER waiting room or a refugee shelter might feel less alone because of what we'd built. We were doing it. Slowly, quietly, and soon, not just locally. 2 weeks later, Maya called. "We've been approached by a European health consortium. They want to pilot Kintsugi across multiple cities." I blinked. Cities? Yes. 7 to start. Then possibly the EU standard. I didn't respond right away. "Are you ready?" she asked. I thought about the version of me who once sat at Lila's side, pitching dreams others called hobbies. The girl who registered a patent while her friend stood in a spotlight built on stolen bricks. Was I ready? "I've always been," I said. The European contract was the kind of deal startups dream about, big, global, validating. But as I read through the documents that week, line by line, clause by clause, I realized what truly set us apart. We weren't chasing a valuation. We were chasing integrity. The consortium's goals were bold: integrating Kintsugi into refugee services, immigrant mental health triage, rural clinics. They wanted speed, scale, and customization. Most companies would have nodded eagerly, sacrificed depth for momentum. But I didn't. We set conditions. No white labeling. No stripped-down features for less funded areas. No language prioritization that favored English-first experiences. Every deployment had to uphold the full heart of our platform: equity, dignity, nuance. The negotiation team hesitated. But Maya stood firm. And I refused to flinch. Your product is powerful, one of the delegates finally said during a tense Zoom call. But your terms are unusually uncompromising. They're unusually human, I replied. Which is why the product works. Silence. Then a nod. The deal was signed. I gathered the team for the announcement. Not in a formal meeting room, but in our kitchen over lukewarm coffee and shared awe. Sophia, now our head of UX, looked like she might cry. You built this from a paper notebook, she whispered. No. We built this. From fire. From fracture. From being overlooked until we taught the world where to look. That night, I returned to my apartment, lit a single candle, and opened the last page of that old notebook. Blank. Waiting. I wrote, "Compassion at scale, not a dream." A delivery. Then I closed it for the last time and placed it in the drawer of my desk. Some stories you finish not because they're over, but because they've become part of you. This wasn't the end. It was a foundation. The architecture of grace. With the European pilot underway, we began hiring faster than ever before. But I refused to let Kintsugi become another machine bloated by speed and stripped of soul. Every new team member was interviewed not just for skills, but for story. I asked them about the last time they felt unseen, how they handle silence, what empathy meant to them when no one was watching. Some said I was too sentimental for a founder. But I'd seen what happened when people built things without understanding what they were for. I wasn't going to let our mission be abstracted into wireframes. One of our first hires under this new expansion was a man named Almari, a Senegalese linguist who had once been a refugee himself, soft-spoken, with eyes that had seen too much and still chose kindness. He joined our natural language processing team and within weeks had already helped shape a culturally nuanced semantic tree for Wolof. When he presented it, he said, "This isn't just about words. It's about being heard without translation losing your soul." He belonged here. So did Priya, a trauma-informed therapist who'd worked in rural India before joining our behavioral mapping team. And Matteo, a coder who had grown up in a foster system that never once asked how he felt, only if he was behaving. Their stories became the roots of our global expansion. And as we grew, I returned to the cities that shaped me. Boston, Oakland, San Jose. I visited clinics using our pilot versions, sat in waiting rooms, and listened. One nurse told me, "Your system de-escalated a panic attack in a way even I couldn't." Another woman, a grandmother from Guatemala, cried while describing how the AI spoke like her daughter would have, gently, not like a machine. It wasn't about algorithms anymore. It was about honor. Every patch of code, every line of logic, it was all a mirror. A reflection of people the world often ignored. And now, they were part of the system itself. And still, I stayed quiet in the headlines. Let others speak louder. Let the product shine. I had nothing left to prove. Only something to preserve. It was inevitable, I suppose. You build something meaningful, and eventually the spotlight turns. You either step into it, or let someone else take the mic. The media came calling. First, a quiet request from Wired for a founder feature. Then Forbes, curious about the woman behind the whispering machine. And finally, TED, inviting me to speak at their global summit under the theme Reclaiming Voice. At first, I declined them all. My work was never about being seen. I'd already survived the high-gloss version of visibility, seen my ideas paraded on stages by people who didn't understand their weight. I didn't need applause. But Maya sat across from me at a cafe one afternoon and said, "It's not about vanity, Isabel. It's about legacy. You started this in silence, yes. But now people who need hope are listening. Give them something to hear." That night, I walked into my apartment and pulled out a photo of my mother. She was younger in the picture, hair pinned back, her eyes filled with tired wisdom. She used to work the night shift at the hospital while taking care of my siblings during the day. She never talked much about her dreams, only about responsibility. But I remember her telling me once, when I was 12 and unsure about raising my hand in science class, Mija, sometimes silence is survival. But don't forget, your voice can build bridges too. So I said yes. The TED Talk was terrifying. Not because I feared the stage, but because I feared what it would unearth. I wrote and rewrote it 12 times. Deleted entire sections. Added one line back at the last minute. When the day came, I stood behind the red and looked out at an audience I couldn't see under the lights. Then I began. I didn't talk about machine learning models or patents. I talked about being the daughter of a woman who saved strangers but never got saved herself. About speaking broken English in school and being told my accent needed fixing. About building kintsugi not from ambition, but from ache. And I ended with the same sentence I'd once scribbled on a sticky note years ago, in the corner of a cafe napkin next to Lila. What if machines could learn empathy before we forget how to teach it? The room was silent. Then came the standing ovation. But I didn't hear the applause. I heard my mother's voice. And for once, I believed she'd be proud. The TED Talk changed everything. It wasn't just the views, though those flooded in by the millions. It was the way it reached people I never expected. Messages began arriving from around the world. Teachers in rural districts, refugee aid workers, mothers with nonverbal children, elders who said our app made them feel less invisible. But among the outpouring of gratitude, one envelope arrived, no sender name, no stamp, just hand-delivered to our office. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Typed. You may not remember me, but I remember you. I was in the audience at your first ever pitch, the one Lila gave. I was one of the VCs who dismissed you. I remember thinking your passion was too quiet. Your vision, too soft. I was wrong. I'm not writing for forgiveness. I don't expect you to care. But I wanted you to know some of us are watching, learning, regretting. You've changed the industry. You've changed me. Thank you for staying when the rest of us weren't listening. There was no signature. I read the letter 3 times. Then folded it and placed it in the drawer with the others, the ones I never responded to, not because I didn't appreciate them, but because I was already answering the only way I knew how, by continuing. There's a kind of justice that doesn't come with courtrooms or headlines. It comes in silence, the kind where someone finally realizes what they missed, and you don't have to explain it anymore. And that day, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt free. Free from needing the applause of rooms that once ignored me. Free from chasing approval in languages that never held me right. Free from the weight of proving what I already knew. We were building something bigger than success. We were building restoration. And there's no valuation high enough for that. Months after the talk, I was invited to speak at an innovation summit in Singapore. Kintsugi was now integrated in 8 countries. We'd launched our trauma-informed API toolkit. Our multilingual emotion index was becoming the new industry standard. But between the contracts and calendars, I found myself thinking about something small, a room. Not a conference hall. Not a startup accelerator. Just a quiet room, a physical space where women like me, underrepresented, underestimated, unheard, could build. A room where no one would tell them to tone it down or ask if they had a male co-founder. A room where their stories wouldn't be distractions from the pitch, but the pitch itself. So I called it the room we never had. We launched the pilot program quietly, 1 room, 1 city, 12 founders. They didn't need to apply with pitch decks. Just a story. A fire. A reason. There was Adila from Kuala Lumpur who coded an entire maternal health chatbot after losing her sister to a preventable complication. Carmen from Oakland, who rebuilt her community's food network after wildfires destroyed every source of nutrition. Dina from Berlin, who taught AI to recognize PTSD triggers in refugee children's speech patterns. They didn't need a table to be invited to. They were the table. I watched them collaborate late into the night, whiteboards crowded with empathy and math, joy and exhaustion. And I saw myself in every one of them, not in the polish, but in the hunger, the resilience, the refusal to be erased. One night, Adila pulled me aside. No one's ever believed in my idea like this, she said. I don't even know how to say thank you. I smiled. Build it. That's the thank you. Because I knew the truth. When you give someone the room you never had, it doesn't erase your past. It rewrites the future. And that is legacy. The invitation came wrapped in ivory cardstock, thick enough to suggest wealth, impersonal enough to confirm pretense. Lila was getting married. I hadn't heard from her since the settlement with Nico. The occasional tweet, the shadow of her name in someone else's article, but never anything direct. And yet, here it was, a wedding invitation, embossed with gold lettering, my name spelled correctly, as if history could be glossed over by calligraphy. It didn't say, "We'd love to have you." It said, "You're expected." The date was in 3 months. The venue, a vineyard in Napa. The guest list, I assumed, would be a curated curation of who's who and who's left standing. I placed the envelope on my kitchen counter, stared at it for 5 days, then tucked it in the back of a drawer beside the letter from the unnamed VC and the notebook from before everything broke. I didn't respond. Not with a yes. Not with a no. Some events are not attended. They're endured in memory and released through silence. But 3 weeks later, I received a text. "Lila, I know you got the invite. I understand if you don't come. But I wanted you to know something." She attached a photo. It was her wedding program, and on the last page, under acknowledgments, was this line. "To Isabel Tran, who taught me that ideas aren't just invented. They're inherited. And if we're lucky, we're allowed to carry them with integrity. Thank you for building the truth even when I didn't deserve it." I stared at the words for a long time. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Just recognition. Sometimes that's more healing than an apology. I didn't reply. But the next day, I dropped a small package in the mail. A book. The original Kintsugi AI Design Journal, newly published and used now in university courses. On the title page, I wrote one line. This time, with credit. In the months that followed, Kintsugi grew into something I hadn't dared to imagine at the beginning, not just a platform, but a presence. It was being referenced in academic research, featured in textbooks, even adopted by institutions that once dismissed AI with a conscience as impractical idealism. But what moved me most wasn't the metrics. It was the whispers. The quiet testimonies from people I'd never met. A woman from Syria who used the app to navigate trauma she couldn't express to her children. A teenager from Detroit who told us it was the only thing that ever made him feel safe after 3 a.m. An elder in Taiwan who simply said, "It listens like my late wife did gently." These were the rewards I never posted about. They weren't milestones. They were mirrors. Proof that we hadn't just created a tool, we'd opened a door. And through it, people were walking back to themselves. One day, as I reviewed our next expansion plans, I noticed a new feature proposal from Amari's team. He'd called it Quiet Room. A space within the app designed not to diagnose, suggest, or redirect, but to hold space. A room with no agenda, just a listening presence. For users who didn't need fixing, just witnessing. "We got the idea from you," he said when I asked. "From how you sit in meetings. You don't fill silence. You wait. That waiting teaches people they matter." I couldn't speak for a moment. I was too full. Because there, in a simple UX proposal, was my story, not told, but honored. Not loud, but lasting. We launched Quiet Room the following month. And in the first week, over 50,000 users entered, and simply stayed. No words. Just being. And in that space, I realized, maybe my loudest contribution wasn't my code, or my pitch, or even my pain. Maybe it was the silence I protected, the kind that makes room for others to breathe. A year after the European pilot launched, we were invited to present our findings to the World Health Council. It was a formal setting, crisp suits, rows of dignitaries, language headphones clamped over silver hair and furrowed brows. But I didn't bring slides. I brought a story. I told them about Maria, a mother in Lisbon who used kintsugi to unpack the grief of losing her son, something she said she couldn't do in therapy because grief like mine doesn't translate well into polished language. I told them about Abdul, a refugee who hadn't spoken in 2 years until kintsugi's interface whispered gently in his native dialect, "It's okay. You don't have to explain everything." And I told them about the girl I used to be, the one who created out of silence, out of being unseen, unheard, underestimated. The one who stayed in the background until her voice was strong enough to carry others forward. When I finished, the room didn't erupt. It softened. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with stillness. Later that evening, after the delegates had dispersed, an elderly woman approached me backstage. Her accent was thick, her movements slow but sure. "You write with no pen," she said. I smiled, confused. "Pardon?" "You write in people. They carry your work. That's the best ink, it doesn't fade." She walked away before I could ask her name. But I carried her words with me. They became my mantra in the months that followed, etched quietly in the header of every internal document, whispered at the start of every leadership meeting. Write in people. Because products fade. Features change. Companies rise and fall. But people, when truly seen, become legacy. And that was all I ever really wanted. It was a gray Thursday in early spring when I received the message. From Lila Reyes. Subject: Passing through San Francisco. Any chance you'd like to meet for a walk? No pitches. No favors. Just two people who remember who we were. I stared at the message longer than I needed to. I thought about the girl who once dreamed with her on fire escapes, and the woman who once watched her present my idea to investors with practiced ease and no mention of me. But I also remembered the letter. The acknowledgement. The way she'd stepped in when she didn't have to. So I said yes. We met at Crissy Field, the bay mist curling around the Golden Gate like an old shawl. Lila wore flats this time, not heels. No designer bag. Just a windbreaker and the weight of time. We didn't hug. But we didn't flinch either. We walked. "I heard about Quiet Room," she said. "That's beautiful." It wasn't my idea. Just something I made room for. She nodded. "You always made room. Even when we didn't deserve it." There was no bitterness in her voice. Just truth. We walked in silence for a while. Watching families picnic, dogs run, lives unfold in ordinary beauty. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The past?" "No. The part where it was just possibility. Before the money. Before the press. When it was all notebook sketches and too much coffee." I smiled. "Sometimes. But I love this more." "This?" she asked. I stopped and gestured around us. "Peace. Knowing I built something that wasn't just mine, it was meant." She nodded slowly, as if letting that land. We reached the benches near the bluff. She sat. I stood, watching the waves. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said finally. "But I wanted you to know you changed me, not just by winning, but by not trying to destroy me when you could have." I didn't respond right away. Then I said I wasn't trying to be noble. I was just tired of watching women tear each other apart for scraps. She looked at me, eyes wet. "Still, thank you." We didn't say goodbye. We just stood when the wind grew colder and nodded. And as she walked away, I realized something. There are some ghosts you don't need to bury, only to outgrow. We didn't advertise our milestones anymore. By then, the world was already watching. The press releases wrote themselves, and the press, when they called, often spoke as if they'd always believed in us. But I remembered. I remembered the seed of it all. The first time I whispered the idea out loud and someone laughed. The first investor who told me mental health doesn't monetize. The co-working space where I overheard Lila practicing a pitch that had my fingerprints on it. All of that stayed with me not as bitterness, but as compost. What people forget is that even the darkest soil feeds the strongest roots. When our 10th country deployment launched South Africa, with full Zulu and Xhosa integration. We didn't celebrate with cake or speeches. We opened a letter from one of our first users in Johannesburg. My son didn't speak after the car accident. Not even to me. Then one night he typed into your app, and it answered in the same way I would have, but better. He asked me if he could write back. And we've been talking ever since. That was our ribbon cutting. That was our metric. Impact that lives in living rooms, in dinner tables, in whispered nighttime conversations where healing has no grammar but still finds a way. Maya framed that letter. We placed it above the entrance to our new headquarters, a sunlit, modest building we renovated in the Mission District. The same neighborhood where it all began. The same streets Lila and I used to walk when the idea was still just electricity and wonder. And I thought, as I unlocked the door for the first time, keys cool in my hand, we returned to the root. But not as girls with dreams. As women with soil on our hands and branches full of fruit. And still, I hadn't peaked. Not yet. Because there were more to invite. More to lift. And so much more to build. It happened on a train from San Francisco to Palo Alto. I was heading to a university panel on inclusive AI. The kind of thing I did now with ease, not for clout, but because every room I entered changed when someone like me took the mic. The car was half full. Business suits and headphones. Everyone tucked into their devices. I was reviewing slides when a voice broke the hum. "Excuse me, are you Isabel Tran?" I looked up. She couldn't have been older than 19. Braids tucked behind one ear, a worn backpack clutched tight. Her eyes flickered between hope and nerves. "Yes," I said, soft but sure. "I'm sorry," she rushed. I watched your TED Talk. Twice. I'm studying computer science and I thought I had to choose between being real and being respected. I put my tablet down. "You don't," I said. "The world just hasn't caught up yet." She blinked, then smiled. "You make me believe I can do both." "You can," I said. "But not alone." I handed her a card, not a business card, but one from the room we never had. It simply read, "Come build with us." She took it like it was gold. And as she stepped off at the next stop, I saw myself, younger, quieter, still shaping her voice. The train pulled forward. And I sat back, thinking not of what I had achieved, but of what I had made possible. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what walks beside you, carrying your name in whispers, long after you're gone.